Nobody talks about the ceiling they grew up under. Not because it hurt them. Because they never noticed it was there. That is the first thing you need to understand about poverty that nobody in a motivational video will ever say. The ceiling is invisible. And invisible things do not feel like traps. They feel like the shape of the world. There is a man named Carlos. He is 31. He works 2 jobs, both hourly, both without benefits. He wakes at 5:14 every morning, not because of discipline, because the bus comes at 5:47 and missing it costs him 40 minutes and possibly a write-up. He has never been late. He has also never been promoted. He does not know these two facts are connected, because nobody told him that showing up is the floor, not the ceiling. He thinks reliability is the virtue that will be rewarded. It won't. Reliability at the bottom of a system means you are too useful to move. This is not a story about laziness. Lazy people do not wake at 5:14. This is a story about something quieter. Something the people who stayed poor and the people who escaped poverty both experienced, but only one group was taught to name. The thing is called a mental model. And most people who were born without money were handed the wrong one before they were old enough to question it. Here is what the wrong mental model sounds like, stripped down to its core logic: work hard, spend less, save what is left, repeat until enough accumulates. This is the model passed down through generations of people who survived on wages. It is not wrong. It is just catastrophically incomplete. Because it describes how to manage scarcity. It says nothing about how to escape it. The correct mental model, the one taught in different zip codes, at different dinner tables, in different conversations, sounds like this: capital attracts capital. Time is the only resource that does not scale. Income from labor has a ceiling, income from ownership does not. Relationships are infrastructure. Risk, managed correctly, is not danger. It is the mechanism. Same country. Same calendar. 2 entirely different operating systems running inside 2 different skulls. And the gap between those operating systems compounds every single year, the same way interest compounds in an account you never see. The word people reach for when they want to explain poverty is discipline. Or effort. Or choices. These words are not wrong either. They are just pointed at the symptom instead of the cause. A man with the wrong map can walk with extraordinary discipline in exactly the wrong direction. The effort is real. The destination is an illusion. There is a study, it has been replicated, it has held up, where researchers took 2 groups of people and gave them a cognitive test. Before the test, one group was asked to think about a financial problem they were facing. A car repair bill. A missed payment. Something real and immediate. The other group was not. The group that thought about their financial problem scored, on average, 13 IQ points lower than the group that did not. 13 points. That is the cognitive gap between someone operating under financial stress and someone who is not. Not because poverty makes people less intelligent. Because scarcity consumes bandwidth. The human brain is not infinite. When part of it is constantly running threat assessment on whether the rent will clear, on whether the card will decline, on whether the call from an unknown number is a collector, that part is not available for long-term planning, for strategic thinking, for the quiet patience that wealth accumulation actually requires. Rich people are not smarter. They are operating with more of their brain. This is not a metaphor. It is neuroscience. And no one teaches it to the people who most need to hear it, because the people who most need to hear it are not in the rooms where this kind of research gets discussed. Carlos does not know about this study. He knows he is tired. He knows that at the end of a double shift, when he tries to sit down and think about next year, the thought dissolves before it forms. He blames himself for this. He should not. He is not failing to plan because he lacks ambition. He is failing to plan because his brain is already full of the immediate, the urgent, the precarious. Poverty is not just a financial condition. It is a cognitive tax. And it is levied every single day. Now we arrive at the part that is harder to say. The systems that maintain poverty are not accidents. They were not designed with cruelty in mind, most of them were not designed at all, they accumulated, layer by layer, over decades of decisions made by people who were not thinking about Carlos. But the effect is structural. And structural problems do not yield to individual effort the way individual problems do. Payday lending exists in specific zip codes. Not because of coincidence. Because the regulatory environment in those zip codes permits it, and the population in those zip codes is captive enough to sustain it. A 2-week loan at 400% annualized interest is not a product that competes on merit. It competes on desperation. It is placed in the exact locations where desperation is most concentrated, and it charges the highest rates to the people with the fewest alternatives. The fee for being poor is that poverty becomes more expensive every time you need to borrow your way through it. This is not a conspiracy. It is an ecosystem. And ecosystems optimize for their own survival, not yours. The same logic applies to credit scores, which determine the interest rate on a car loan, which determines the monthly payment, which determines whether a person can afford a car to get to a job that pays more, which determines whether they can escape the bus schedule that costs them an hour each way. The score was built on historical behavior. Historical behavior was shaped by historical conditions. Historical conditions included deliberate exclusion, redlining, discriminatory lending, and wage structures that were not accidental. The score does not know any of this. The score just runs the number. And the number follows you everywhere. Into the apartment application. Into the job application, in states where employers check credit. Into the insurance quote, which is higher in the zip code that is already more expensive to live in. The systems do not conspire. They do not need to. They simply reinforce each other, quietly, automatically, without malice and without pause. Carlos knows the rent is higher than it should be. He does not know why, not the full architecture of why. He does not know about the zoning laws that restrict housing supply in the neighborhoods with better schools. He does not know that the landlord's pricing is partially downstream of a software tool that analyzes local market data and recommends rates designed to maximize extraction. He just knows the number is what it is, and that arguing with it has never worked. He is right. Arguing with a system at the individual level is like arguing with weather. You can be completely correct in your complaint and still get wet. What nobody teaches, and this is the cruelest omission, is how to stop arguing and start moving perpendicular to the system instead. Perpendicular means not playing the game on the terms you were given. It means identifying which rules were written for someone else and which ones still have gaps you can use. It means understanding that the system rewards ownership, not labor, and then asking the uncomfortable question, what is the smallest, most realistic form of ownership available to me right now? Not a mansion. Not a stock portfolio. A skill that scales. A piece of digital infrastructure. A small stake in something that generates without your physical presence. The entry points are different than they were 40 years ago. The principle is identical to what it has always been: stop selling time. Start owning something. This sounds simple. It is not. Because the first barrier is not knowledge. Knowledge is searchable now, freely, everywhere. The first barrier is identity. People do what they believe people like them do. This is not a weakness. It is how human beings navigate a complex world without burning out on constant decision-making. You use your identity as a shortcut. You look at the people around you, the people who raised you, the people in your neighborhood, the people in your tax bracket, and you infer from them what is possible for someone like you. This inference is mostly correct. And occasionally, it is a cage. When no one in your immediate world owns anything, no property, no equity, no business, ownership does not feel like a real category of thing that real people do. It feels like something that happens to other people, in other stories, under other circumstances. The idea of starting a business does not spark ambition. It sparks suspicion, because you have watched businesses fail, you have watched people like you lose money they could not afford to lose, and you have learned from that evidence. The lesson you learned is not wrong. It is just incomplete. You learned that risk without knowledge is reckless. You did not learn that knowledge changes the math on risk. Carlos has a cousin who started a pressure washing business. The cousin bought a machine for $900, put the number on Facebook, and made $4,000 in his first month. Carlos heard this story. He did not act on it. He thought, that worked for Marcus because Marcus is different. Because Marcus was always like that. Because Marcus takes risks I am not built to take. Marcus is not different. Marcus was also afraid. Marcus just did not have enough information to calculate exactly how afraid he should be, so he moved anyway. Carlos has too much information, all of it pointing toward reasons why it will not work, and not enough of the right kind, which is information about what actually happens when someone like him tries and fails. The answer, almost always, he loses the $900 and is exactly where he started, minus $900. He does not lose his family. He does not lose his health. He does not lose anything that cannot be recovered. The catastrophe is recoverable. But nobody drew him that map. Poverty is sustained by many mechanisms. Structural ones. Cognitive ones. Systemic ones. But there is one mechanism that almost never gets named in polite conversation, and it is this. The social cost of breaking from your class. When you begin to move, when you start reading different things, thinking differently, making different choices, the people around you will not always celebrate it. Sometimes they will. But sometimes, and this is the part that breaks people quietly, they will treat your movement as a departure. As a judgment. As evidence that you now think you are better than them. You do not think that. But the distance is real, and they can feel it before you can name it. And the loneliness of upward mobility, the in-between space where you no longer belong to where you came from and have not yet arrived where you are going, is something nobody puts in the pamphlet. Nobody tells you that getting out is also a kind of loss. That the people you love most might be the ones who hold you in place, not from malice, but from the very human desire to keep the circle intact. There is no clean answer to this. The people who navigate it do so differently. Some maintain the relationships and create distance anyway. Some lose the relationships and carry that loss for the rest of their lives. Some find communities of people who are also in motion and build belonging there. There is no version that costs nothing. The cost is real. The question is whether you are willing to pay it. And nobody can answer that for you, because nobody else is living inside the specific web of loyalty and love and obligation that you are. The calculus is yours. What I can tell you is this: the decision is made before most people realize they are making it. It is made in the small moments, in whether you read the article or scroll past it, in whether you start the conversation or stay quiet, in whether you sit with the discomfort of not knowing something long enough to go find out. The decision is granular. Invisible. Made 100 times before it shows up as a result that anyone can see. Carlos woke at 5:14 this morning. He will wake at 5:14 tomorrow. The question that nobody has asked him, that nobody around him thinks to ask, is not whether he is working hard enough. The question is whether he has ever been handed the right map. He has not. And that is not his fault. What he does with that information, if he ever receives it, will be entirely his. That is the uncomfortable truth about why the poor stay poor. It is not laziness. It is not stupidity. It is not character. It is the compounding effect of the wrong mental model, installed early, reinforced constantly, made invisible by familiarity, and sustained by systems that were not built with Carlos in mind and were never modified to include him. The people who escape do not escape because they worked harder than everyone who stayed. They escape because somewhere, in a book, in a conversation, in a moment of friction with someone who thought differently, they encountered the right map. And they were desperate enough, or stubborn enough, or lucky enough, to follow it. The map exists. It always did. The question is who gets handed it, and at what age, and whether there is still enough road ahead to use it.